On this day in history, we remember the remarkable individuals who shaped our world. Welcome to Who Died Today in History, where we honor their legacies. From artists to leaders, their impact lives on. If you find their stories meaningful, like, subscribe, and hit the bell to stay connected. Fred Astaire, one of the most iconic dancers and entertainers in American history, died of pneumonia on June 22, 1987, at the age of 88. His death was the quiet close of a glittering era in film, dance, and performance, an era he helped define through grace, elegance, and unrelenting innovation. Though he passed peacefully of natural causes in Los Angeles, his departure carried the weight of nostalgia and reverence for a bygone golden age of Hollywood. Astaire's death occurred in a time when cinematic trends had long since shifted from the romantic musicals and tap routines of the 1930s and 40s to grittier, more modern forms of storytelling. Yet, even amid the cultural evolutions of the late 20th century, Astaire's name still conjured images of tuxedos, sweeping ballrooms, and impeccable footwork. His artistry stood as a reminder of a time when entertainment was shaped as much by refinement and effortlessness as by spectacle. His career had been built during the Great Depression, an era when audiences flocked to movie palaces seeking escape and hope. Alongside Ginger Rogers, Astaire offered both. Their films celebrated optimism, poise, and perseverance, values that resonated deeply with a struggling population. In this light, Astaire was more than a dancer. He was a symbol of resilience through art. The immediate aftermath of his death was marked by widespread tributes from across the globe. Fellow performers, critics, and fans alike hailed him not only as the greatest dancer in film history, but as a consummate professional whose dedication to his craft elevated the very idea of what dance on screen could achieve. From Broadway stages to television specials, his influence was etched into the rhythm of modern performance. Fred Astaire's death prompts reflection on humanity's admiration for excellence and the pursuit of timeless beauty. He mastered a language that needed no words, one of movement, timing, and subtle emotion. In doing so, he taught audiences that art could be light and yet deeply moving, effortless but powerfully human. We continue to immortalize him through film retrospectives, dance education, tributes in animation and popular culture, and the enduring magic of every perfectly choreographed sequence he left behind. In a world that constantly changes, Fred Astaire remains suspended in motion, an eternal dancer whose footsteps echo across generations. Lynn Hamilton, an accomplished actress best known for her role as Donna Harris on the classic sitcom Sanford and Son, passed away from natural causes at the age of 95. Her death, while quiet and absent of media frenzy, offered a moment to reflect on a life and career that subtly but powerfully shaped the portrayal of African American women on American television. Hamilton's career unfolded during an era of enormous social upheaval and transformation in the United States. Beginning her screen work in the 1950s and gaining national recognition in the 1970s, she was part of a generation of Black performers who helped open doors in an industry long resistant to inclusion. Her roles were often grounded in dignity and intelligence, avoiding caricature and instead portraying the emotional complexity and quiet strength of everyday Black women. Her death came in a time when representation and diversity in media remained pressing conversations. In that light, Hamilton's passing served as a reminder of the progress made and the path still ahead. She was not a headline-chasing celebrity, but a steady, talented performer whose presence on television subtly contributed to changing hearts and minds. The immediate reaction from fans and former colleagues was one of warmth and gratitude. Many recalled her poise, her calming screen presence, and her trailblazing contributions to Black television history. Hamilton's portrayal of Donna Harris on Sanford and Son a series that was both comedic and culturally significant, offered viewers a vision of a black woman as a nurse, a caregiver, and a partner. At a time when roles for women of color were scarce and often reductive, Hamilton's performances suggested a deeper humanity. Her death amplifies her legacy in ways only time can reveal. As younger generations rediscover classic sitcoms or explore the roots of television representation, Lynn Hamilton's work stands as a quiet milestone. It teaches us that not all legacies are forged in spectacle. Some are built in steady, graceful steps. We immortalize figures like Hamilton through continued recognition, academic study, and the preservation of their work. Through reruns, retrospectives, and cultural appreciation, she lives on as part of a larger story, one of progress, representation, and the enduring impact of those who made space for others simply by showing up and doing the work with excellence.
I put a lot of effort into researching and creating these stories every day. If you enjoy this content, please consider subscribing, liking, and leaving a comment. Your support means a lot. Also, I recently opened channel memberships for those who want to support even more closely. Thank you for being here.
Laura Antonelli, the Italian actress whose beauty and sensual screen presence made her a cinematic icon in the 1970s, died of a heart attack at her home in Ladispoli, Italy, on June 22, 2015. She was 73. Her death was quiet, almost unnoticed in a world that had long moved beyond the glamour of her era, yet it stirred reflection on a life that mirrored both the allure and cruelty of fame. Antonelli's rise came at a time when European cinema, particularly Italian film, was deeply enmeshed in the sexual revolution. Her breakthrough role in Malizia, 1973, cemented her status as a sex symbol, a label that would both catapult her to stardom and later become a burden. In a cultural landscape that idolized female sensuality, but offered few paths for nuanced female characters, Antonelli became trapped in the very image that had made her famous. Her beauty was commodified, celebrated, and ultimately used against her. In the 1990s, her life took a tragic turn when she was arrested for cocaine possession, an ordeal that led to a long legal battle and public shaming. Though eventually exonerated, the damage to her reputation and mental health was profound. Her final years were spent in solitude, away from the spotlight that had once adored her. That she died alone, in a modest apartment, reflected the darker side of celebrity culture in an age when the line between public persona and private suffering was often ignored. The immediate consequence of her passing was a wave of nostalgia, tinged with regret. Fans and former collaborators remembered her as a figure of tragic beauty, someone who had embodied an era's ideals only to be discarded by the very industry that once celebrated her. Her death reignited conversations about how society treats women in entertainment, especially those whose fame is closely tied to their appearance. Antonelli's story is a powerful meditation on mortality, image, and memory. We remember her not just for her films, but for the deeper narrative of longing, vulnerability, and resilience they hinted at beneath the surface. She has been immortalized in restored film archives, essays on cinema history, and the wistful admiration of audiences rediscovering her work, not just as an object of desire, but as a complex human being shaped by her time. Pat Nixon, former First Lady of the United States and the devoted partner of President Richard Nixon, died of lung cancer on June 22, 1993, at the age of 81. Her death, quiet and largely overshadowed by the controversies that had marked her husband's political career, offered a moment to reassess a woman who had long stood in the background of power, dignity, and national turbulence. Born Thelma Catherine Ryan, Pat Nixon embodied the ideal of mid-20th century American womanhood, resilient, reserved, and steadfast in public duty. As First Lady from 1969 to 1974, She navigated one of the most volatile periods in American political history, including the Vietnam War protests, the Civil Rights Movement, and ultimately, the Watergate scandal. Her death, decades after the resignation that had marred the Nixon legacy, reflected a generational shift. She was among the last First Ladies shaped by the values of wartime patriotism, privacy, and stoic loyalty. Her passing in a time of political cynicism and media saturation offered a contrast to the role she had once played, a First Lady who rarely sought the spotlight but worked quietly to improve White House accessibility and support humanitarian causes. The immediate aftermath of her death saw heartfelt tributes from political allies and former White House staff. Though not a towering political figure in her own right, she was remembered for her grace under pressure and her unwavering support during the collapse of her husband's presidency. Pat Nixon's death did not shift the trajectory of history, but it invited a re-examination of the women behind political power. Her role was emblematic of an era when First Ladies were expected to be gracious hosts and moral compasses, not policy influencers or independent voices. Yet in her own restrained way, she laid groundwork for the evolving expectations of political spouses, balancing tradition with subtle influence. Reflecting on her passing, we see how death invites memory to soften judgment and deepen understanding. Pat Nixon is now remembered less for the scandals that surrounded her life, and more for her quiet strength, her philanthropic contributions, and her humanity. We honor figures like Pat Nixon not through statues or sweeping biographies, but through a growing recognition of the personal costs of public life. Her story endures in museum exhibits, oral histories, and in the shifting roles of First Ladies who followed, a legacy of resilience beneath the weight of history. Joel Schumacher, the prolific American filmmaker and costume designer, died of cancer on June 22, 2020, at the age of 80 in New York City. His passing marked the end of a career that had seen both critical acclaim and popular scrutiny, and it invited a broader reflection on his influence in shaping the tone and style of mainstream Hollywood cinema in the late 20th century. Schumacher's death came at a time when the entertainment industry was grappling with the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, a global crisis that forced both creators and audiences to reconsider the role of storytelling, spectacle, and legacy. Known for his flamboyant visual style and bold directorial choices, Schumacher had directed a diverse range of films, from the stylish vampire thriller The Lost Boys, 1987, to the legal drama A Time to Kill, 1996, and the controversial Batman Forever, 1995, and Batman and Robin, 1997. His death was not violent or tragic in the traditional sense, but it represented the quiet fading of an era, one where directors could take big risks in big-budget films without the hyper-controlled branding strategies of the modern cinematic universe. The immediate response to his passing was a mix of nostalgia and renewed appreciation. Once criticized for the campy tone of his Batman films, Schumacher was increasingly seen as a visionary who had dared to blend pop art with blockbuster expectations. His unapologetic style, as well as his openness about his sexuality in a historically conservative industry, came to symbolize the shifting cultural values of the late 20th century, where identity, creativity, and commerce collided on screen. Schumacher's death amplified his legend not by changing the course of film history, but by inviting a more generous reassessment of his legacy. In death, the polarizing aspects of his career softened, giving way to a richer understanding of his contributions, not just as a director, but as a tastemaker, designer, and storyteller unafraid of excess. In remembering Schumacher, we're reminded that art and legacy are often reevaluated through the lens of mortality. We immortalize such figures not only through the films they leave behind, but through the evolving conversations about their work. In the case of Joel Schumacher, the conversation continues, bold, colorful, and unafraid to take risks, just like his films. George Carlin, the legendary comedian and social commentator, died of heart failure on June 22, 2008, at the age of 71. His passing marked the end of a career that had spanned 5 decades and redefined American stand-up comedy. Known for his sharp wit, biting critiques of politics, religion, and culture, Carlin's death came at a time when America was in the throes of a post-9/11 identity crisis, torn between tradition, censorship, and the pursuit of truth in an increasingly complex media landscape. Carlin's death from natural causes, though not unexpected given his long-standing heart issues, reverberated through the comedy and entertainment worlds. His voice had become a mirror for society's contradictions, hypocrisies, and absurdities. In an era when free speech and political correctness were hotly debated, Carlin's unfiltered commentary seemed more relevant than ever. His death served not only as a moment of mourning, but also as a wake-up call, a reminder of the vanishing breed of artists who challenged authority not with rage, but with razor-sharp satire. The immediate consequence of Carlin's passing was widespread public reflection. Tributes poured in not just from fellow comedians, but from intellectuals, journalists, and everyday Americans who had found clarity, humor, and even comfort in his words. He had long stood at the intersection of entertainment and philosophy, with routines like the 7 Dirty Words sparking Supreme Court debates over the First Amendment. His death reignited discussions on censorship, comedy's role in public discourse, and the evolving boundaries of free expression. Carlin's legend only grew after his death. He was posthumously awarded the Mark Twain Prize for American Humor, and his stand-up specials and books saw a resurgence. In classrooms and podcasts, his material continues to be dissected not just for laughs, but for its insight into human behavior and societal dysfunction. In the end, Carlin's death reveals much about humanity's uneasy relationship with truth, power, and mortality. He wielded humor like a scalpel, cutting through pretense to expose deeper realities. We immortalize him not only through recordings and tributes, but in the continued courage of those who speak truth to power, armed not with anger, but with intellect and irony. His voice may be gone, but the echoes of his laughter still challenge us to think harder and laugh smarter. Buddy Landal, known as Nature Boy in the professional wrestling world, died on June 22, 2015 at the age of 53 from complications following a car accident. Though his death was ultimately categorized as accidental, it was preceded by years of physical strain, personal battles, and the volatile lifestyle emblematic of professional wrestling during the 1980s and 1990s, a time when fame often came with a price. Landal's career had all the ingredients of stardom, charisma, technical skill, and a persona that echoed the flamboyant wrestling icons of his era. But behind the glitter and bravado was a man whose trajectory was deeply affected by addiction and injuries, challenges all too common in the industry at the time. His death came just days after the accident that caused his injuries, and although not violent in the conventional sense, it underscored the long-term physical and psychological tolls that many wrestlers from his generation faced. The immediate consequences of Landal's death were not headline-shaking on a global scale, but they were deeply felt in the wrestling community. His passing reignited discussions about the lack of long-term health support for aging wrestlers and highlighted how many stars of the golden age of wrestling were fading from the spotlight without the recognition they arguably deserved. Landal was once considered for the top spot in major promotions like the NWA, and while personal struggles prevented that ascent, his story served as both inspiration and cautionary tale. In death, Landal's legend became more layered. Fans and peers remembered not only his skill and flair, but also his humility in later years. He had begun speaking openly about his struggles and faith, offering hope to others battling similar demons. His death didn't shift the broader history of wrestling, but it contributed to a growing awareness of the need for reform in how the industry treats its talent, before and after the fame fades. Landal's passing invites us to reflect on mortality not just as an end, but as a mirror. In commemorating figures like him, we're reminded of the fleeting nature of glory and the enduring value of resilience. We immortalize him not through statues or mainstream documentaries, but through tribute matches, fan memories, and the recognition that even unfulfilled promise carries profound meaning. Vinnie Paul, legendary drummer and co-founder of the heavy metal band Pantera, died on June 22, 2018, at the age of 54. His death was attributed to natural causes, specifically dilated cardiomyopathy and coronary artery disease. While not violent like the tragic murder of his brother and bandmate Dimebag Darrell in 2004, Vinnie's death still sent shockwaves through the rock and metal world. It marked the end of an era for fans who had followed Pantera's aggressive sound and defiant spirit during the turbulent cultural shifts of the 1990s. As a drummer, Vinnie Paul was revered for his precision, power, and distinctive groove, which helped define Pantera's brutal yet disciplined sound. His death, rooted in heart complications, reflected the often overlooked physical and emotional strain endured by performers in high-intensity musical genres. For decades, metal musicians operated in a world of relentless touring, substance abuse, and emotional trauma. Especially in Vinnie's case, having witnessed his brother's on-stage assassination. His passing thus symbolized both the wear and tear of rock stardom and the lasting scars of personal tragedy. The immediate consequences of his death were heartfelt tributes from across the music world. Fans and musicians alike mourned a man who had not only helped shape modern metal, but had also become a symbol of resilience in the face of unimaginable loss. Bands like Metallica and Avenged Sevenfold honored him in concerts and statements, while his fans held candlelight vigils, highlighting how deeply his influence resonated beyond just the drum kit. While Vinnie Paul's death didn't shift global politics or alter history's course, it underscored the fragility of icons in music's most defiant genres. His legacy amplified in death, particularly as he had continued creating and performing with Helya, the band he formed after Pantera. His contributions were not only rhythmic, but emotional, anchoring fans through music that gave voice to anger, sorrow, and survival. Vinnie's passing reminds us how closely mortality and memory intertwine in art. We immortalize him through vinyl and digital playlists, tribute tattoos, and the unrelenting thunder of Pantera riffs blasted in garages and stadiums alike. Through his music, Vinnie Paul lives on, not just as a drummer, but as a defiant echo of passion, pain, and power reverberating across generations. Nancy Benois' death in June 2007 remains one of the most chilling and tragic episodes in professional wrestling history. Nancy, a former valet and wrestling personality known by her ring name Woman, was murdered by her husband, famed WWE wrestler Chris Benois, in a murder-suicide that claimed the lives of Nancy, their 7-year-old son Daniel, and Chris himself. The nature of her death, violent and intimate, unfolded in their Georgia home over a weekend, sending shockwaves far beyond the wrestling world. Nancy's death was not only horrifying in its brutality, but deeply reflective of the hidden dysfunction and mental health crises often overshadowed by fame and physical performance in the world of professional wrestling. The incident exposed critical issues within the industry, including the long-term effects of repeated head trauma, later identified in Chris Benoit's brain as chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE, unchecked domestic violence, and a culture that for too long had ignored the emotional and psychological well-being of its performers and their families. The immediate consequences were seismic. WWE pulled all promotional material related to Chris Benois and issued statements distancing the company from the tragedy. A scheduled tribute show was replaced with re-airings of older programming once the truth of the murder-suicide emerged. Nancy, once an important behind-the-scenes figure and on-screen personality, was suddenly remembered less for her wrestling contributions and more as a victim of one of wrestling's darkest scandals. Nancy Benoit's death amplified conversations about the costs of glory in contact sports, especially wrestling, where performance often masks personal turmoil. The tragedy forced the wrestling world to confront its own lack of safeguards and to institute reforms, including more rigorous drug testing and wellness policies. In reflecting on Nancy's death, we confront uncomfortable truths about mortality, control, and the illusions of fame. Power, as seen through the lens of celebrity and masculine dominance in sports entertainment, can become dangerous when left unchecked by accountability or empathy. Nancy is now remembered not just in old footage or fan pages, but as a symbol of loss, of systemic failure, and of the pressing need to prioritize safety and mental health in high-stakes environments. We immortalize her not with grand statues or banners in arenas, but with a somber acknowledgement of her humanity and a collective vow to do better in protecting those who live in the shadows of powerful men.